This is the High Desert Luthiery podcast with luthier Luis of LEF Custom Guitars.
I'm very non-traditional in all of my build. Some things may look somewhat traditional, but I've always tried to find a way to do things that was more efficient and more accurate, even if it goes against what, traditional builders have always done. I don't like tradition for the sake of tradition.
Welcome to the High Desert Luthiery podcast. I'm Perry from Manga Guitars. There's a logo there, and I'm the creator of the High Desert Luthiery Invitational, or as we're calling it now, HDLI. This show will happen twice a year in celebration of luthiers, luthier adjacent creators, musicians, and the art that comes from combining all these things. The HDLI is a unique event that encourages actual support in the music community by providing free booths to the vendors and free admission to the public. The event includes vendors and musicians that are curated by me to create a cohesive, organized event. The HDLI encourages community and collaboration amongst the artists. This podcast is one way to help us all come together. To learn about the show and the artists, please visit the website highdesertluthiery.com. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right, yeah. So I am Luis. I live in Corrales. That's where my home shop is, and I am the owner of LEF Custom Guitars.
All right. And so, from what I see, did you build that shop?
Actually, my dad built this pretty much by himself when we moved here in 2000. It took him a couple of years, framed the entire thing, poured the concrete, everything, and it was actually his intention to use this as his wood shop eventually. And he thankfully eventually let me pretty much take it over when I was 16.
Right on. And so your dad is also a woodworker?
Yeah, he's been a woodworker pretty much his whole life. Nothing professional technically, but he's always been fantastic with building furniture. Obviously, building things like this. He was going to be an architect at one point and went a different direction. But yeah, he knows his stuff.
Right on. That's cool, man. I'll often get, when I meet people, they're like, "Oh man, you must come from like a family of woodworkers." And I'm like, "No. That's just me." For some reason I wanted to hang out around a bunch of stuff that makes me sick. Um, oh man. So I I'm just gonna lead with this. I remember like as soon as I could have a website, I put up a website, and then social media came out, and it wasn't really important to me until one day a friend of mine was showing me like, hey, check this out. Like this person's got some builds on Facebook, right? And so I joined Facebook, and then I'm just not like really into it. And I just tried to like make a game of it. And one of the and I don't remember where when it was, but like I'll come across builders that to me have like a really strong style, and having worked with like just a shit ton of really talented luthiers in the past, I realized, oh, I could follow the work of my friends and see what they're up to, and as well as share my work. I'll be honest with you, I am not good at taking pictures in the shop. Even finished instruments, I'm terrible at taking pictures. I'm more excited to deliver it and, move on to the next one. And so it's a tremendous practice. So I'm attracted to like design. And I remember coming across LEF guitars and going, holy shit, like these are beautiful. The colors, the like it's a similar thing that really attracted me to like Paul Reed Smith. Um, and how consistent the photography was, and just everything about it. It was like eye candy. And I will be straight up and honest with you. I'm a little starstruck today. And I was like that at the show because you're one of my favorite builders. Just to relate this as best I can, I play, but I don't play professionally anymore. and I'm not attracted to pointy guitars. I've had them, I've made them, they're great. It's just the work itself. It comes through in the pictures, and I was just like, I was having like an oh shit moment holding your instruments at the last show. I'm usually looking at something just like super excited about it, and like I end up having all these questions. And that's kind of why we put the podcast together. Another reason why we put the podcast together is like it's easier to get to know each other this way because we're all so busy in our lives that we don't get to take the time to go visit one another. But yeah, I just wanted to share that with you and get that off my chest.
Yeah, man, absolutely. It's kind of funny because so I've lived here my whole life. Like I said, I started building when I was 15, which would have been around 2005-ish, 2005 to 2006. There was barely any social media back then. You had like MySpace, and that was about it. And so there wasn't really a way to find other builders or other people who did similar things, except for like the old school forums. And that's actually how I learned to build mainly was from scouring the old Project Guitar forum, looking for instruction and stuff like that. But yeah, there was no one around here that did the kind of stuff that I did. And even now, like I tell people what I do, and they're still like, like, what do you mean you build guitars? Like, is that like how is that the thing that's in demand? Like it's so strange. So it's really cool when you actually run into people, especially locally, that not only appreciate it but actually do it themselves and understand what goes into it, and how much of a craft and art it really is. So we are in a like company.
Yeah. Can you share your experience with forums and kind of figuring things out that way?
Yeah, so even back then there was still just hardly anything out there. There was like a couple like actual guitar playing forums, tab forums, stuff like that. Project Guitar Forum was pretty much the original one. I think it goes all the way back to 2000, 1999, something like that. And I'm still a part of that forum. Most of those guys that are there now are some of the original guys. And forums have died out because social media has taken over so extremely. But yeah, I remember just when I was 15 years old trying to figure out how templates work and how bearing bits work, and what scale length is, and that was really the only place that had valuable information. And so I joined that forum, spent days just looking through all of the previous work that people had posted, and it was fun back then. There was always in progress builds, and people taking pictures of every step of the way of what they were working on. And that's really how I gained a lot of knowledge, and kind of took what they did and kind of filled in the gaps and kind of learned my own ways to do things a little bit better. And that was really the start of my career.
Oh, okay. I don't think I became aware of the forums until like uh very recently.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've been in this bubble like I don't know like there's like advantages to it, and then and there pros and cons. The pros are if I'm coming up with an idea, it's based on something that like a guitar I've seen, right? So like I grew up playing Fender guitars, and those designs inspire me. I think they're pretty dorky, like I'll
Yeah.
admit that, but like taking my own spin on them and sort of making the designs work for me, I'll do that, or I'll just pull something out of nowhere. And occasionally it's fairly original. I think it's harder to be original these days with the market saturation that there is. But I think the advantage to that is like proof of concept. Somebody did something very similar to this and this works. And one example of that is I designed this archtop maybe like a decade ago, and I just got busy in my shop, never got to make it. And I saw another luthier building like 90% the same thing. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But all these feelings came up around that, having like had stuff ripped off in the past. I had all these feelings come up of like, well, like, this guy's ripping me off. But then I'm like, oh, I'm here now. Like, this isn't happening now. Like, this is pretty cool that this dude came up with something very similar. We don't know each other. I've never made this build. All I have is full scale drawings and and a date on it. And and I was just like, wow, like even then, like these sort of ideas are kicking around, they're out there. And it kind of brings up this idea of like, in a way, as artists, we are kind of channeling, pulling things out of the ether. And anybody else can grab that idea and run with it. And if anything, it's really cool. You look at all the guys that are making Telecasters now. You don't make Telecasters, or I don't know. You might have in the
No, I
past. I don't know, but you look at all these guys doing the same thing, and you pick them up if you get the chance to at any of these shows, and they're all drastically different. And realizing that is what makes this so exciting. It's like, wow, you can have a completely different experience with a very similar build. So, bringing this back to you, when I see the guitar you have behind you, what do you call that model? Do you have a name for it?
Unfortunately, that one's one of the most generic names. Just because I started calling it by that name when I first designed that guitar, and it's just called an SS super-strat, and people became familiar with that name, and so I just never changed it. That's probably one of the most overused terms ever, but yeah, that's just a super-strat.
I see, when I look at that, I see like flavors of Jackson. I see flavors of Ibanez, Black Machine. Like, can you talk about your inspiration in the design and like why you made the decisions you did?
Yeah, absolutely, and you're 100% right. Like Jackson, ESP were some of my favorite guitars when I was a teenager. When I started finding out, what heavy metal guitars really were, like the differences between just a standard Fender or something more traditional. And I mean, you look at it, and most people are just like, that's a Strat shape, but this is a little bit different just because it is actually slightly downscaled from a normal like Strat. Strats are about 13 and a half inches wide here. I actually narrowed the waist about a half an inch, so it's a little bit narrower, it's a little bit shorter, but I also made the points a little bit pointier, and that obviously comes from the ESP and the Jackson design. I didn't want to go full on Ibanez when they have very very thin horns and very deep cutaways. So yeah, one day I just kind of took an ESP template and just started tweaking it a little bit, and this is what I ended up settling on, and I'm extremely happy with it. It's very compact. It's very comfortable. But yeah, the reason I even decided to make a slightly different shape is because I don't know. There's just certain shapes out there that they look good, but they're not. They were never exactly what I wanted. Like I always just wanted to tweak something just a little bit. Like usually like the contour of the horn. Like some of them go very straight up or they go very out to the side. It just I'm so OCD in certain ways that it bothers me if it's not aesthetically exactly the way that I can envision it. So that was kind of the reason that I decided to design one based off of traditional design, but with my own tastes. And yeah, Black Machine, obviously, not a lot of people know about Black Machine except for the diehards and heavy metal community, but they're fantastic guitars. Honestly, somewhat basic in design and construction, but they're pretty much legendary at this point. So took a little bit of inspiration from that as well. The cutout and the headstock. But this is also something you don't see very often on this type of guitar. Is a set neck, multi-piece neck has become more popular in the last 5-6 years. That never used to be a thing until Kiesel and companies like that really started pumping stuff like that out. But yeah, this has become one of my most popular models.
A big part of like the thought process behind this show, the whole High Desert Luthiery thing, is like sort of changing the language. And I feel like, at times we use whatever words we have, right? Regardless of how people might interpret them. And I'll hear this like OCD thing. And I think that a lot of people sort of look at it negatively. I would just call it like an attention to details and like precision minded. I just feel like a lot of people, outsiders, they think like, oh, like what is this guy fucking neurotic about everything? And that's not the case. Like we all kind of get into this, and some of us will lean really heavy on design, right? And really work to be satisfied with the design, the outline, everything, make sure that it's balanced, and we won't really be satisfied until we get there. Then when you get there, you're then refining other things. And so I just want to kind of point that out, like not to argue with you about your experience. I feel like the words are something that we can like improve around it, and just for the sake of other people being willing to understand us better, or helping people understand us better. I love what you did with that headstock. So I didn't hear about Black Machine until I had a few of them come across my bench, and I think one was a copy and two were the real thing. And I just remember like it was fresh. But the headstock, like Parker flies were really popular. And I was like, oh, cool. This guy's drawing from Parker. Like, that's really cool. I think the thing that struck me was the invisibility of Black Machine. There was just like a statement on a landing page, like place a bid or some shit like that. And you couldn't get a hold of anybody. And it was a mystery. And the things were so unorthodox. Like the necks were made really well, in that they had a finished quality to them. But the bodies were not sanded. All the router marks were in them. Like it was so crude yet so perfect. And I'd never experienced that in any other brand. And in a way, it's kind of like it's pretty brave to do something like that. But like I mean, it's art. So it is what it is. And having experienced those guitars, like they're tremendous instruments. And it really shows like all of these limitations that a lot of people put on these things, they're quite silly. And I just love how that guy was willing to do his thing and stay true to it. And I've seen him like painted as well, but like the bare wood, like it was just like, whoa, that's really cool. And thinking about it now, I think I drew a lot of inspiration from that. When you designed your headstock, like how long did that take you? Because I think a lot of builders stall out on their headstocks.
So for this one, it was actually fairly quick. So going back to what I was talking about on the Project Guitar forum, there's a guy on there. His name is Carl. He's from Finland. He's a phenomenal luthier. He's phenomenal engineer, and he's fantastic with all types of CAD drawing, software, designing, everything. He's just amazing at all of that. And so I had messaged him on the forum asking him if he'd be willing to help me draw something up that I had an idea for. And it was a very crude way of how I sent him my idea. I literally just took a Black Machine headstock and I just went into Microsoft Paint and kind of drew out the areas that I wanted, a rough shape. And he did two different designs, and the second one, I liked them both. And the second one was that one we ended up going with, and I think it took him maybe 10 minutes just because we had already had, a rough idea of what it was. But the idea had been in my head a while. The actual designing of the template, I think literally took him 10 minutes. So I'm grateful to have guys like that who really, are good at what they do, specifically with stuff like that, who can design things to scale, and I can always trust him that it's going to be 100% accurate. And that's how we ended up with this.
All right. Like, and then the back of the neck, I'd like to talk about the back of the neck. And is that a scarf joint on there?
It is, yeah.
It has such a cool look. And like, oh man, look at that. So what was the inspiration for that? Because like to me, it's easier to make a neck out of a block of wood, like to do a glue up of all those pieces and cut out many necks. And it's an added step. But like how clean so anybody that doesn't know Luis or hasn't seen one of his guitars in person, his work is immaculate. The joinery is some of the best joinery that I've ever seen. Like the finishes, we'll get on to that. The way you finish your instruments is it's some of the best work that I've seen, and it's also fairly unique in that like the face of your build is glossy, and then the back is it's not. And it offers this texture experience. And I'll let you talk about, what you're doing for that. But what drove you to doing the scarf joint?
So when I first started building, like this is gonna sound weird, but like I really didn't like I still kind of don't. I don't like traditional Fender style headstocks. I don't like that you have to use string trees. You can almost get away with that now with staggered tuners, but a lot of the time you still need some type of a string retainer or a string tree. So I always wanted to do an angled headstock. And obviously, if you're going to do an angled headstock without a scarf, you need a block of wood probably, it's close to 3.5 inches thick. And when I was younger, obviously I didn't want to waste that much wood to make one neck. So I would get 1 inch thick stock and do a scarf joint. Obviously, I wasn't doing 7-piece necks like that back then. I would do just a plain maple or regular mahogany with a scarf joint. And then once I started to get into the multi-laminate necks, I started thinking, I was like, well, how hard is it going to be to get these to line up? Like if there's nothing in between there and it's off just by a little bit, like, and I did that one time and I got called out on the Project Guitar forum big time. And I was like, okay, so at the time it was kind of an idea of, what can I do to kind of break up the line there if it's off by, a microscopic amount, but noticeable. And so I was like, what if I just put a different piece of wood in there and you can't tell if it's not lined up? And that's how it started. Now I found a way to line it up if I wanted to, and you can actually even check if you put a straight edge on there. That's still, they line up perfectly. But it ended up being such a cool signature. And
I agree.
Yeah, and a lot of people actually recognize that. I was not the first one to do that. I will not say that. Obviously, a lot of people had done it before. There was a couple of guys on the forum that did that. But it ended up being somewhat recognizable just because of the types of wood I would use and things like that kind of became I can't claim it as my signature, but a lot of people do recognize me for it. But yeah, that's how it ended up becoming more of a decorative piece now than anything.
Did you ever play with like the angle of the headstock, or did you just kind of pick something in the beginning and stick with it?
I tried 2 different angles along the way. I had done like a 15-degree angle when I started, and it was a little bit overkill. And obviously, the angle determines a lot where your volute and where your scarf is going to end up. And just because obviously you change the angle of the headstock, the angle of the scarf is going to change as well. So where it pops out the back here, kind of, I don't know. I didn't like the way it looked and how it was to machine a 15-degree. So I ended up testing with a 13-degree, and that's what I've stuck with ever since.
Oh, all right. Like these things I feel like they're key things that a lot of us builders question. And a lot of my guitars look like they're flat heads, like Fender style headstocks, but they're all actually angled back, like 3 degrees in the least, and sometimes a little further back. And it's to get, better pull over the nut for sure. But a lot of times you'll see string trees as well. And well, I actually like on the old Floyds with the bar, I'll use
Yeah.
the bar. And it's more of an aesthetic thing. It's also functional, but it's just an aesthetic thing that I don't know why I like it. It's just,
Yeah.
there's those things that you end up finding that you're like, well, fuck it, I like it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with this. And it's such your headstock, well, your builds, they're well, when I look at old designs, especially like the San Dimas, I look at it, I'm like, this is kind of silly. Like, why? And then like finally hearing the interviews with the people that designed this stuff and the reason why they made, the decisions they made. For me, your SS is very refined. Like it's like you took that to where it was gonna go next. And I feel like for many years, like seeing super strat style builds, builders were never doing that. They were just like buying templates when that became a thing and just sort of, making a bunch of the same. And your designs, they're just so clean. And by designs, I mean like all your lines, they flow really well. Everything's balanced out, in my opinion, way more than it was originally. And it's so pleasant to work with. And the other thing about your builds is the wood you choose. And aside from it being like you picking just stunning pieces, do you have like a favorite material to work in?
Oh man, I use so many different woods all the time that it's really difficult to pick a favorite. For body wood though, it would have to be black limba. It looks amazing. It machines very well. It's very light for the type of wood it is. It is expensive though. That's the only downside. Obviously, the mahogany. It's about 2.5 to 3 times the price of mahogany most of the time. Tops, I'll use any top that looks good. That's all it comes down to for the top on me. This is actually a piece of koa that I got directly from Hawaii, a company called Hawaii Tropical Hardwoods. They got a website and Facebook, Instagram. They have some really good woods all the time. They actually supply a lot of the woods for a lot of major companies too, specifically for koa. For neck woods, obviously, that's a little bit different story because they have to be stable woods. They have to be woods you can trust. But most of the exotic woods that are out there now, if they're the right cut, they're going to be suitable. This is kind of what my standard has been the last couple of years.
It's
Whatever
maple, purple heart, Paduke.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So usually that in a combo of 5 or 7 pieces. This one I decided to go 7.
Is your centerpiece tapered?
It's not. It's probably just
Oh,
the
it's just
camera
the
angle
angle.
there. hmm Some companies do that, and it does look really cool though. But I've actually never tried that.
Yeah, I remember taking a shot at that and ended up losing. I lost that battle and
Yeah,
I
that's
think it just came down to like I couldn't get the joinery clean enough. Like I couldn't figure out a way to like I cut the angle on the table saw, but I couldn't get it clean enough to glue it up clean enough. And eventually said, "Fuck this. Let's just glue them in straight." And
yeah.
and call it a day. I'm tired of just throwing all this into the burn pile. But a friend of mine does that, and oh God, it just adds a little bit more. It's so subtle, but to the trained eye, it's like, whoa, that is so cool. I had a question for you, and
Yeah.
I lost it. Um, Let me see here. Let me go back to the list here. I'm getting practice conversating. So living in Corrales, I'd imagine living anywhere, I'd imagine that you probably started playing guitar before you started building them.
So this is also a funny story when I try to explain this to people. So I started playing guitar when I was 15. It was April of that year, and super into heavy metal. That was what got me into it. I had a friend who, was super into heavy metal, and he played guitar for a few years. Taught me some things on guitar. You know, at that age, both of us, his dad was, a mechanic, and he was always working on stuff, and my dad was a woodworker. So both of us, when we kind of grown up, always trying to, fix things and make things, and figure out how things worked. And so when I started playing guitar at 15, my mom ended up buying me a guitar, my first guitar a couple months later. And of course, within a month of that, I was already taking it apart, trying to see how it worked and what the electronics were and how it was wired and, why they, bolted it together the way they did. And so, yeah, I started playing guitar only a few months before I actually started trying to build and work on my first guitars myself.
Right on. That's I think so many of us have similar experiences. I was making a note. I remembered the question that I had for you. When I became aware of the forums, and I think like the groups on Facebook, I was probably homesick, I think is what happened. And like for those of you who don't know, I've got a pretty shitty respiratory system, and I have my whole life. And so like I was homesick and like just looking at Facebook and like, oh well, let's see what else is on here. Trying to figure it out essentially, and I found all the groups, found all these guitar groups, all these luthier groups, and was like, oh, okay, well, I'll check these out. And I think there's a lot of people doing a good job and sharing and relating, but there's a lot of assholes,
Oh man.
uh, and especially when it comes to pointy guitars. And ultimately, like it just kind of, I just said, this isn't for me. Like this, there's too much of that, just nonsense. I know that like you have a presence in those communities still. What is that like for you, and how do you feel about that? And have you been like on the other side of, somebody just, being a jerk for the sake of being a jerk?
Oh man, it's a battle out there, man. It's constant constant turmoil in those groups. It's really unfortunate because there's such a good opportunity to share good information and help people really enjoy modding guitars and working on guitars and anything guitar related, because it's groups for specific things. There's groups for guitar wiring, guitar pickups, finishing. I'm in like 3 different finishing groups. But some of those groups, man, it's difficult. There's the guys who know what they're talking about, and the other guys just don't want to, they don't want to take their advice. And then you got all the guys who've, done things as simple as, unbolted a neck, and they think they know everything. And they're usually the ones out there giving, false or incorrect information. And that's the worst part of it is, there'll be a thread on there with 100 different comments, and maybe 5 or 6 of them have even remotely correct information. And so a lot of the time, I have to jump in there and be like, guys, there's a lot of incorrect information here. Like, I don't expect you to believe me over all these other people, but there's proof out there, and there's a lot of other options other than taking this bad advice. So unfortunately, that's the hardest part about it, is really trying to be patient with the people that deliberately post incorrect or uninformed advice. So you have to deal with that. If you're willing to push through that, there are some great guys out there who know their stuff that share a lot of valuable information, especially with finishing, man. Like, to be a really good finisher is a lot different than to be a really good builder.
I
I
agree.
was a good builder a long time before I became a good finisher, and it's one of those things too where there are a lot of different ways to do things, and that's a lot of people's argument. Is there's not one right way to do things, and that's completely true. But there are better ways, and there are more efficient ways. And I think a lot of people don't want to admit that just because they do things a certain way. And the way that I actually became good at it is because I found more efficient ways to do things. I'm very non-traditional in all of my build. Some things may look somewhat traditional, but I've always tried to find a way to do things that was more efficient and more accurate, even if it goes against what traditional builders have always done. I don't like tradition for the sake of tradition. That's a thing I say to a lot of people when I'm explaining, why I build the way I do and how my methods work. Same thing. There's not one way to do things, but there are better ways. So that's what I try to tell people on the forums. It can be as simple as weighing the pros and cons. Like, why are you gonna spray your finish before you route the guitar? Like, some people try and do that, and it's like, it may work, but you're going to run into so many more issues than if you just did it in the right order. An order of operations is a huge thing I push on people, because that can be the difference between running into all these different problems that wouldn't exist. That's a different topic, but so yeah, overall, I've had good and bad experiences on those groups. You just have to really be wise about what information you decide to to take and apply, because it's not all correct.
Yeah, very good points. In the past, like I got to meet some of the builders and luthiers, and then sort of luthier adjacent guys like inlay guys that I had their books and stuff, and I got to meet them, and they were complete assholes. Bless you. And like I got to work with a lot of these guys in many instances. Like for instance, I made one of the guitars and they got to do, it was a collaboration. And so I have this great apprehension about getting to meet people that, or when I get to meet somebody that like I love their work, if I don't know them, it's I have this apprehension, and I was put at rest in that you're very open and willing to share what you're doing and talk about it at this show. And I was just like, oh yeah, this is so cool. Like I was just like, yeah, this is perfect, because there are a couple guys that aren't coming back from the last show, and I meant every word of this isn't an asshole event, like it's asshole free event.
Right. Yeah.
I meant every word of it, because I feel like that sort of behavior, closed-mindedness, or like insecurity, taking that stuff out on other people. It just like it really cheapens the experience. And I'm trying to curate a show where we have like people that are willing to talk about it and excited to talk about it. And I remember seeing you pop up in the groups, and I think like a friend of mine was like, "Hey man, like you've been teaching guitar making for so long, like you should pop into the groups and check them out, and like maybe help out. You've been working in repair for decades now, and like a lot of people could use your help." And I think this was like maybe 2020, and I wasn't really looking for something more to do, but like they send me links and I'll check them out, and ultimately I just realized like I'd much prefer to just teach in person than like for me, just for my I think for my temperament. Like I'm a little hot-headed, and so knowing that about myself, I was just like, geez, these people are being mean, like there's no point to that.
Mhm.
And then like you might weigh in on a question or a topic. And my whole thing in experiencing so many different shops over the years as well, there's more than one way to skin a cat here. Like here's what I ran into. Even something about somebody sharing a splinter, like to that person that might have been devastating, but to have somebody tell you like, oh, you're a wimp, I've had way worse splinters than that. It's like, that's not the point of this. Like, come on, dude. And I feel like a large part of the guitar culture is like that. It's a pissing contest. And so putting this event together, we really wanted to make sure that, hey, this is not the case here. Not only that, but this sort of thing isn't welcome. Another thing, sort of related, I'll see if I can clearly make the connection here, is there were a few local builders that a lot of people I talked to were like, hey, you got to get these guys, in your show. And what they don't know when they make those recommendations is it's not only up to me. Like I can invite whoever I'm going to invite, but it's up to them to accept the invitation. And it's also up to them to not be an asshole. And you were one of those builders. And it wasn't only from locals, it was actually mostly from out of state builders that I contacted, doing sort of similar things, but some of them not. And even though they decided they weren't going to do the show for whatever reasons, every time they're like, hey, but you should hit up Luis, if you haven't already, because he really knows his shit and he's a good dude. And I was just like, cool. Like, so this is awesome that we're on the same page, and this is awesome that more people know this. And I just love how consistent everything you do like comes through. And I can't express to you enough like how and to the listening audience, like being able to hold one of these instruments, it's like, holy shit, this is the amount of craftsmanship here is tremendous. I love it. I feel like in my shop with what I do, I'm pretty loose with things like I have my own aesthetic, you know, I have my own goals with everything. And one thing that has kind of come up for me is I don't really stay to a lane. I do many styles and I sort of set rules for each style or goals to achieve, and I work at doing it that way. And you know, builders like you that really stay in a lane and are just so fucking good at it. It's eye candy, man. I can't express to you like enough like how exciting it is. Like if I'm on Instagram, I'm there looking for you and for, you know, a few other guys like, oh, what's new today? And
Yeah.
you know, another one of those builders is my homie Sarah. He wasn't at the last show. He got sick. He was supposed to be there, and he's just a phenomenal artist in whatever he's doing.
Mhm.
And I just love looking at that stuff. And I don't know what sort of inspiration I'm drawing. I know it's there, but like uh, just finally getting to see it in person, it's like, wow, man, this is dope. So like you mentioned growing up, you know, being into metal, what kind of bands were you into? Like, who was your favorite when you first started playing?
Oh man, I'm probably gonna get heat for this, but it's a little stereotypical. Metallica has always been my favorite band. That's what got me into music in the first place. That's what got me absolutely obsessed with, um, you know, guitar tone and just the pure, aggression and heaviness of those early albums was really just what captivated me. And what's interesting about that is that has a direct correlation to how and why I build the way that I do. Because obviously, James, he plays a few guitars, Explorers, made by a luthier named Ken Lawrence, which I didn't even realize that so many people don't know who Ken Lawrence is. But Ken Lawrence is my idol, man. He was really the first one to do kind of what I do. He took, a classic, heavy metal guitar, the Explorer, and combined that with exotic woods, these, extravagant, phenomenal inlays, and combine that all together. That was the first time I've ever seen that. I mean, this was, back in the 90s when he built James's first guitar, but there was nothing like that back then. It was black painted guitars or, bright painted guitars. You had exotic basses and stuff. You didn't have, exotic topped woods on heavy metal guitars played by heavy metal bands. That was just unheard of back then. And so once I saw, what Ken had done, and how he took these ridiculous pieces of like Babinga and put these ridiculous, like gold mother of pearl and abalone inlays into the neck of these amazing like prehistoric settings and stuff like that. Like I was obsessed with that, and that was really my first inspiration of that wave of guitar, and that was why I wanted to build. I saw how perfectly he executed it, and just how every single thing on those guitars was just so intentional, and he didn't skip over anything. Like I scoured the internet looking for pictures because those guitars are hard to find. There's not many of them out there. So I've never seen one in person, but those guitars are legendary now. They're $10,000 used. But it is interesting how the direct correlation from falling in love with the music of Metallica to understanding their gear to seeing the guitars that Ken made for James. I wouldn't even be here without either of those. Like I probably would have never gone this even if I had started building. If I hadn't become familiar with Ken's work, I would probably be building completely different.
Yeah. I was always surprised there were less players playing like even like the really fancy BC Rich builds or the you know the Bernie Ricos.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember having a bunch of those come across my bench and was like, holy shit, what's going on here? Neck
Yeah,
through, like, oh, this is heavy. This
yeah,
sounds wild. Um, and like I worked on one of the guitars from the builder you mentioned, and you know, I guess because I had so much stuff like that, I didn't know what it was at the time. I was just solving a problem and
yeah.
you know, getting it out the door, getting paid. And so like those experiences now, I'm like, oh wow, I did have one of those come across the bench. Like, oh fuck, I wish I would have taken pictures with it.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder what it looked like. Like I don't remember clearly all the details. It's just kind of hazy. But it's wild how something like that can change you, that experience, figuring that out. Oh shit, that's the piece of gear. Like, and then, you go down the rabbit hole of that. And I feel like his work really inspired a lot of builders. And when I saw your Explorer style guitars and your X style guitars, I was just like, holy shit, somebody finally fucking got it right. Uh, and just having been around those guitars forever, um, they're clunky.
Mhm.
Like, they don't have to be clunky. They can be big and still be balanced, precise. And I love it. And I had a few requests from different metalheads, thinking that that's my lane. And, hey, can you do this X style? Well, you know what? It's not really my thing, but, go hit up LEF. And I didn't know you at the time. And I
Mhm.
certainly hope they made it over to you. It's just like there's so many people that I meet now that will do something just tremendously. With that said, like, in your shop, and this could be in, in life as well, what would you say are your superpowers? I haven't been asking this question as consistently as I want to because I haven't figured out how to work it into the context. But like in your shop, you've mentioned doing things efficiently and things like that. So like what would you say are your superpowers?
That's an interesting question. Kind of like we mentioned earlier, efficiency definitely. I can build a guitar. If I was working on one guitar and it was warm enough for glue to dry and finish dry, I could make an entire master grade build in 10 days. And that's not because I'm rushing it, but like I was saying earlier, like I've developed and I found the most efficient and accurate ways to do things where I'm not constantly having to think like, well, okay, I did this now, like how am I going to do this? Nothing's contradicting each other. I have everything down to the perfect order of operations, which I guess would be a separate thing. Over the years I've developed the best order of operations where nothing contradicts itself, or where I don't have to go back and redo something, or go back and check something because I forgot, or like, oh, I didn't do this first. I feel like that's been one of the main reasons I've been so successful and so consistent in my builds. Combining those two things, efficiency with the order operations. That's not anything specific to each build, obviously, but just over the years, I found certain methods that other people didn't do, or I found methods that people did, and I'm like, well, if I just did that a little bit differently, that would actually make things so much easier. Or making certain jigs that they may only serve one purpose for 30 seconds, but just thinking about how I can make something easier on myself, even if it means spending a day making a jig that I'm going to use for 10 seconds. So I feel like those have always been, something that I'm very gifted in, always finding a better way. And even now, like, I've been doing this since 2005, and almost every other month I'm finding a different way. Like, I've done this for so long this way, like, I think I can still change it and do it, a better way. And there's been a few little things like that just in the past few months that I've tweaked. So obviously it's always learning experience, no matter how experienced you are. But I'd say by far those are the first two things that come to mind.
Yeah. Can you expand on the new changes or improvements you've made?
So I'll just share one little thing. When I radius a fretboard, there's a few different ways I used to do it. Now I knock down the rough profile on an edge sander, and then the way I would do it, I would just clamp it to the table. I leave a little extra past the fretboard, that way I have room to clamp it so the raised block doesn't hit it. But what I did instead is I created basically a little sled with a 90-degree angle fence, and I actually screw that into the table so I don't have to clamp it anymore. I have threaded inserts in the jig itself, screws to the table, and then I actually screw the extra piece of the tenon on the neck into that jig, and it's always square. It's always perfectly aligned, and I can just run my radius block up against the fence. without having to worry about it, falling to one side or being, cockeyed to the side. Something simple like that.
Oh, wow. Wow, I've seen it done so many different ways, and like definitely used the edge sander. I sent a lot of projectiles off of the edge sander.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and like that's a job that I've actually been trying to put some time aside to try out one of those you see everybody routing the radius in now, and I've been wanting to try that out. Like I've sort of experienced all these things halfway, like just working in production, having fingerboards get radius on a plec or a CNC router, and then the amount of work that goes into them, it's still very close to the same amount of work if you were doing it by hand. What it comes down to is accuracy. But even with practice, you can get really accurate, as you've experienced. So I really appreciate you sharing that bit of your process. I'm making notes here as you're talking so I can make sure to come back around. You mentioned master grade, and one of the other things I'm trying to do is like clarify or acclimate everyone to the language we're using. So, what does master grade mean to you?
So basically, master grade, it's kind of a loose term these days. It's going to depend on who you ask, what level of builder you're asking, if it's if it's like a large company or if it's an individual builder like myself. Basically, what I consider master grade is a build with 5A woods, the best woods, the best figure, premium finish, premium parts. So basically, the best of the best relative to that design and instrument is what I would consider master grade.
Okay. So you're looking at more of like the materials. I feel like anything that you made is master grade. Like even if, and I wanted to express this at the show, and it's not just like me just kissing your ass. Like at the show, there were a lot of first time builders or, people who were like really new, a couple years into the industry. And even some of their stuff was like, it was pretty good. Like people are
Mhm.
like, the amount of information that's out. And, even if they're embracing technology, and, that'll be another thing we'll talk about here in a second, technology, as in like CNC technology, the work is looking better and better and better and better. And where you'll always see room to improve with a lot of younger builders is in like all the little stuff, that gets outside of woodworking, the fretwork, how they're making a nut. And it's all very subjective as well. But like those are always areas where I'm either like getting better or I'm getting worse. Like, and I was talking to another builder about this recently, and where I buy my fret wire, they changed the alloy,
Hmm.
and it just messed me up. And the wire was super rigid, and it was like not cooperating the way that I was used to it, and I couldn't really figure it out. And you get used to having your systems, and so like I do things very similar to you in steps. I sort of have a process, and for some things I have measurements written down, and for some I don't, because I've just done it so many times. But like it really threw a wrench in the gears, and I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm a new guy right now. Like this is terrible. I really have to adjust, and it really came down to just switching materials and vendors and getting that sort of like comfort level back, like, oh, this is what's working for me. And like to kind of expand on that, I was used to pressing my frets in, tap them in, press them in, and I'll hammer them in now and then. And the fret wire was bouncing out of my fret slots every way that I put it in. Even with glue, it was coming up like the fret slots were deep enough, like they were cut perpendicular, like
Mhm.
everything that was supposed to be done was done, and it just had me second guessing everything I was doing. And it just came down to the fret wire being manufactured different. It really messed with me for a while. I thought, damn, like I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Like I don't know how I can't see this. And so like everything that you do to me is master grade. So I ask you about what that means to you, because to me, master grade or master build like comes down to the builder, because the quality is going to always be there. Like the feel is always going to be there. If I close my eyes, I'm pretty sure I could remember now to the point I'd be able to identify, yeah, this is one of Luis's guitars. Like to me, that's master built, master grade. I guess I'm pointing at like kind of what the build is, like what is coming out of your hands, what is coming out of your shop. It's a great clarity to have that you're associating that with materials. It's like metal, like I love metal. I listen to metal now and then. I listen to a lot of different music. I don't play metal at all. I don't really think I've ever been able to do it. Like I'm not good at practicing, but I love the music. I love the players, that I've got to work with and trying to solve issues for them. It's a hard thing to describe. Like, I guess, like when it comes down to master built, when we're looking at the materials for years, and you pointed at this, the guitars were all painted, right? And I mean, you saw players, Les Pauls, Explorers, Strats. I've even seen metal guys now using Tellys. Everything was painted. So, do you think that, like, do you think it's all about, aside from having a love for fancy wood, do you think that, and fancy being like really figured, really unique pieces, do you feel like it's something you rely on, or like, I just haven't, maybe I haven't seen enough, like I haven't looked at your catalog going back. Like, are you doing solid colors now and then, or is it like LEF is all about the fancy woods?
Um, the last few years have really been all exotic woods, mainly because I invested a lot of money into acquiring a lot of those woods. So I've kind of, had a large amount of that to work with, thankfully. But in my earlier days, that's what I started off with. I started off painting guitars and, trying to perfect gloss finishes and stuff like that. But as far as this may deviate a little bit, but as far as like master grade, this kind of comes down to terminology, I guess. I don't consider master grade and master built the same thing. So kind of like you're saying, like this may be a little arrogant. I don't want it to sound arrogant, but in my eyes, I consider all of my builds master built. You know, I put in the time. I feel like they're consistent enough to where they can compete with other people who are considered master builders. I feel like they can compete with those builds. So in a way, I consider all of my guitars master built. They all get the same attention. They all get the same, construction. Everything on them is built the same way. So as far as master grade, yeah, master grade to me is on top of being master built is what goes into it. The specs and the woods, kind of like we were mentioning. But it's interesting you bring that up though. Is I'm actually trying to take a step back a little bit this year is kind of my goal to go back to kind of those more simple builds, with solid colors and just a more simple, not necessarily traditional, but just a little more basic model for some people, who want just a plain black guitar or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And I think I ask a lot of these questions, just trying to make sure that we're on the same page about things and, just understand how builders are thinking. And, another term that gets thrown around is master luthier. And I think what people lose sight of is like, I'm a master luthier in my shop. If I came to work for you, I'd be a new guy.
I
Like,
don't know about that.
like I would be a new guy and I would be looking at the experience like I've never done this before. What can I learn here? And how can I work to fit in to this shop? And I think a lot of people don't have that experience, so they don't really, understand that term. It's not just something that you're just like, oh, well, I just started making builds and, I'm pretentious and I'm a master luthier. But there's also no qualification program here in the States, right? Like you might have schools that have a master luthier program, some of these luthier schools, but you look at the program and it's 6 months or it's 12 months, or maybe it's 18 months. And it's like, okay, like there's a lot of questions that come from that, right? And like I look at builders and I see the quality and I'm like, there's a master luthier, there's a master of their craft. And especially when I see somebody that's openly saying I'm working at improving. Like that to me right there, it says so much. And I am well aware of many builders that are not. It's a process to them and that's it. And it really comes through in the final product. You get these builds that they don't feel exciting, they don't feel alive. And we've all experienced that now and then coming across other builds in the wild. So like dialing back the look of your instruments, where do you, is this like, you know, is this like kind of just taking a step back and going like, let's kind of go back to where we began since I have all these skills now and see how well I can do it now?
I mean, that's definitely in the back of my mind. Yeah, because like I said, I haven't done something basic in a long time, and I'm kind of excited because it's like, oh, this is gonna be easy now. Like there's so many
Yeah.
less steps. Like so much less time. Obviously, I'm not sitting there gluing up a 9-piece neck, and having to glue the scarf joint in 3 different stages because that scarf joint I showed you that you can't glue it all at once. Like you have to glue it up in 3 different stages. So gluing up one scarf joint is like this is nothing. So I'm excited for that, but that's not necessarily the point. It's just honestly demand. You know, a lot of people like my work, but some people they just want something more plain. Like they're not out there to have a master grade build. They want my designs, my quality with a standard finish, or just a flat black, or even like some type of like metallic color that are out there now. And I kept putting it off and putting it off just because when I'm consumed with these builds, like time flies. Like I'm like, I'm gonna test this in a month or two, and like I'm 15 builds, down the line, and it's been 8 months, and I completely didn't even get to what I was planning to get to. So that's kind of why I want to make it more of like a tangible goal this year to kind of just dial back the extreme stuff and my focus on that and just expand a little bit. It's not even stepping back. It's more expanding. I'm still going to offer the master grade stuff. I just want to have more options for people who, that's not their thing.
Yeah, all right. I totally get it. And this is that other thing where unless I've been in your shop and I've, seen what's coming in to me, you're a very successful luthier. You're moving builds to me pretty regularly. Where do you hope to be in 2 years with your guitar work?
Ideally, I would like to be to the point where I have a consistent flow of either orders, like as in custom orders, or moving stock builds, 2 a month. Two to four guitars a month is about what I can do by myself, just because of the amount of time it takes. Finishing. Finishing is really what takes the longest. I can knock out the woodwork very quickly, but finish work itself takes a long time just because I have to, convert the whole, because I have to do finishing here because I don't have a separate area. So I have to convert the whole shop from woodworking to finishing, and I can't do both at the same time. But ideally, I would like to be at a point where, I have orders placed for the majority of the year, moving, 2 or 4 guitars a month. I really would like to be able to have a little bit bigger reach on social media. Social media is actually where 99% of my sales and reach comes from. Despite having a website, the website barely gets any traffic. Yeah, Facebook, Instagram is where that's where most businesses succeed these days. And even like some of the smaller builders, they have like 15,000, 20,000 followers on Instagram. And I'm like, man, I've had Instagram for like 5 years and I have 4,000 followers. Like it's really difficult to break through to that next level of advertisement and just social media presence. So that would definitely be at the top of my list, just because that's where your reputation is going to be recognized, and where you can actually become well known outside of the small community that I'm already a part of. Like the guys that follow me and the guys that bought my stuff, they've followed me for years, and I just kind of hit a wall there where I haven't really gained a lot of new followers or people who know about my work. So those, I'd say those are the top two.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I feel the same way. I think a lot of my hangups with social media are just that I'm not very interested. Uh, since we moved out here, I'm compared to California, I'm barely doing any guitar work. I mean, it's still a lot, but it's more of like I'm just finishing old builds that kept getting shelved, for production reasons. I'm buried in repairs or I have other orders that I need to fill. And so since we've been out here, I've been more focused on, dropping all the other labels that I was building for. I just have not had an interest in repair. I've just been using my shop time to finish up old projects. And so trying to learn how to use social media and engage with it and figure out how it works. I was just talking with the marketing guy who's helping us. It seems to be a mystery to him as well. And
It's,
there are people that seem to get it though. I've tried to talk to a few of the influencers and I don't speak the same language.
oh no,
Uh,
no.
like it's so wild. If you figure anything out, please do share it. And if I have any insight, I will definitely be sharing that with you.
Yeah.
So, are there any artists that we can keep an eye out for, like mainstream artists that are using your instruments?
Unfortunately, not yet. Most of the stuff I've sold has been, to more recreational players or, guys who do play, but they're not, in anything majorly recognizable yet. Um, I do plan on hopefully collaborating with some somewhat well-known YouTubers who do, guitar reviews and playthroughs and stuff like that. I've been trying to get in with a few of them for a while now, so hopefully that'll lead to something like that.
Oh, that's a good idea. Are there any local bands that you follow or support that you'd like to, get some instruments out to one of these days?
Um, the local scene has been tough the past few years. Albuquerque, New Mexico in general is just unfortunately not, one of those places anymore. Not that it really ever was major in the music scene. There was a period there where, local music was, you know, pretty popping, but I feel like it's kind of tapered off a little bit here. So I'm not too familiar with any local bands anymore.
Okay. Are there any players that you would love, like bucket list players, like, God, I would love to get an instrument into their hands?
What level are we talking here?
Like for me, it would be, let's see, I would say Paul Gilbert is my first choice. I feel like he could play any style and he can really put any instrument through its paces. So when it comes to guitar, it would be Paul Gilbert, and I don't even know, like maybe if I was making a bass, I'd love to have Marcus Miller play it just to hear it, but like I think the information I'd get out of Paul Gilbert on, like, maybe things I could improve or things that nuances that he notices, I think that there could be some info gained. And then also just to hear it, because to me he's an amazing gymnast on the guitar. Do you have any sort of like players like that you would just love to hear but also get feedback from?
I mean, on an unrealistic level, obviously James from Metallica, just because, again, he was kind of the reason that I started playing and building, and he plays Explorer guitars. That's his thing. I would love to just even have him just, hold it and even strum it unplugged and just, see what his reaction would be. That would be life changing alone right there. Um, I can't really think of anybody else that I would instantly be like, this is who, I want it to be. There's like some like YouTube guys and stuff that like, they play guitar similar to what I build that I'm like, that would be pretty cool if I could get one in their hands, which is what I was talking about. I kind of want to get to that point where that is a reality. So we'll see what happens with that.
All right, cool. I'll see if I can work some connections and make that Hetfield connection happen. That would be pretty amazing, I
I
think.
would be.
I had the pleasure of running into him in the wild a couple times, and
Oh wow.
I had good experiences, but I'm pretty well behaved. On maybe just on the inside, I don't know. But I didn't offend anybody both times, and so hopefully. So I've been reaching out, via social media because now you can get a hold of anybody, or at least think you got a hold of somebody. And I've been sending a bunch of invites out to a bunch of different players, just saying, "Hey, look, this show's happening. This is a thing." And like I'm pretty good at harassing people, so I just plan on like keep sending these messages out, keep sending the flyer out, like, hey, we would love to see you here, like just as a visitor. I'm not
Yeah.
asking you for anything other than if you're in the area, stop by and visit. And I
Yeah.
didn't even think about Bay Area musicians necessarily. That's kind of my old stomping ground. So I think I'll definitely start pushing that. It'd be great to see some, follow through for sure. Yeah, I'd like to thank you for spending the time. And I was nerding out for a while, and that's kind of who I am. But thank you. I know time is money, so you want to go ahead and plug your website, your socials, where we can find you, maybe also some of the internet groups that you support. This whole program is about support for Luthery.
So same across all platforms, LEF Custom Guitars, lefcustomguitars.com. I post the most on Facebook. Instagram is also, like we were kind of mentioning, is not is not fully my thing, but they can contact me at any of those, LEF Custom Guitars or at gmail.com for email contact.
All right. Thank you once again, Luis. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next show. Thank you for sharing this build with us. What you got here?
This is a little
Oh,
sneak peek.
God, I saw the pictures of that last
Yeah.
night and I was like,
So this is kind of going in the direction of something a little bit different again this year. I don't normally do bolt-ons, but people are asking for it. So here's a little sneak peek of this new finish as well. This is straight off the gun, so that's not even buffed or leveled yet, but
wow.
there's something to look forward to.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Oh, I'm very excited. I actually prefer bolt-ons, and I'm planning out a couple of neck throughs. And with all the stuff that I have, sort of all these crazy ideas that I have, I don't know if I'll get to the neck throughs. But to see you like doing a bolt-on, it super excites me. It's just my preference.
Yeah.
It's something that I hear in a bolt-on that I don't hear in a set neck. That works for how I play, and
Mm.
uh, and that just like that super excites me. But thank you for joining me, and you have a great rest of your day.
All right, man. It was great talking with you. Thank you.